My name is Lamarr Reid. I'm currently in my 19th year of incarceration. A portion of my incarceration, I've been focusing on things like substance abuse, alternatives to violence, and HIV and AIDS awareness. I'm thankful that you guys have me on this panel, and I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
How did you arrive at abolition and abolition work?
So for me, arriving at abolition and abolition work was kind of a journey. From challenging my criminal conviction to seeing certain things happen within a court space to being actually in prison and noticing like the culture of violence not on the behalf of the incarcerated individuals, but on behalf of the corrections officers. You see a lot of violence, brutality, intimidation. So arriving at abolition kind of made sense. It's just that on that journey I didn't understand what abolition actually meant. But I knew that things that I was experiencing didn't feel right, from the whole criminal court process, on up to my incarceration. So once I began to get into material about abolition, like the things that I was experiencing, that I felt within my heart of hearts wasn't right, abolition started to make more sense, like crystallize for me. So after coming in contact with some of these materials about abolition, I was introduced to this study and struggle group, which a segment of it dealt with abolition, right? So that's when abolition, like as a lens to like not only see the world but see my current circumstances, begin to like form and make sense to me, which made me want to actually be a part of abolition and do abolition work.
What does abolition mean to you, and how do you think it affects you?
So abolition to me means not only dismantling like police and prisons, but also reimagining how we see harm, crime, and punishment, right? And how I think it personally affects me is, obviously I'm affected because I'm an incarcerated individual, so I get firsthand experience of how ineffective the system actually is. From my perspective, it's ineffective. It may be a lot of people out there that think that the system is actually working the way it was designed to work, right? So from my position, I see a lot of like traumas go unaddressed, right? And unaddressed traumas normally show up in the recidivism charts, because when a person comes through these walls and don't address those traumas, they just basically drag those traumas back out into society and basically repeat the same offenses over and over. For instance, when a person comes into prison, you got what Department of Correction deems like primary issues, right? So a person is either aggressive, a sexual offender, or a drug abuser, right? So these are the only mandated programs that a person, or mandated things that a person is supposed to address. However, those specific things are only thought about in terms of what type of offense a person has, right? But we also know that outside of what a person's actually been accused of, we know that there's other pre-existing traumas such as sexual abuse, right? Some people struggle with gender issues that don't get addressed or don't get addressed the way they should within these walls. Child abuse, childhood traumas that linger on into adulthood, stuff like that.
What's it like to think about abolition on the inside?
The best way I could describe it as like counterintuitive, right? Because on the one hand, I struggle with accepting responsibility for causing harm to like my victim, my community, my family. But then on the other end, I getting involved in abolition and knowing how different systems work and understand things like structural violence, institutional racism, how that like creates environments and determines outcomes. It's like a conflict there, right? Because I don't want to take away from the harm that I cause, but I also know that to some extent I've been harmed as well, right? So I think like it's a conflict looking at abolition inside.
So you're talking about thinking about the people who you've caused harm to, and I'm wondering, what does abolition do for people who have experienced harm?
It centers the person that has been harmed, right? I remember recently reading Miriam Carver's book, We Do This Till We Free Us, and she said something along the lines of like a system that never addresses the why behind the harm, never actually contains the harm itself. Right? So now we have a system that is just looking at the how a harm occurred, and their simple solution is put a person in prison, right? Instead of looking at some of the reasons why harm occurs, right? And in doing so, we lose sight of the person that has been harmed. So I think abolition treats harm in a careful way by taking a person that has caused the harm and making that person accountable, and not forgetting the person that has been harmed by, all right, after a conviction has been rendered, all right, that person that has been harmed goes and lives their life, and the person that has done the harming goes on and rots away in the cell.
What do you hope the future will look like in terms of abolition?
So basically, one of the main things that I thought about and that I think is a good idea is when we start thinking about the why harm occurs and so on and so forth, right? And we start looking into the world, and we see that a lot of times things like poor educational systems and poor housing or poor jobs is directly correlated to the reasons why people commit harm or commit crimes, right? So for me, I hope that the future would look somewhat like a society that like invests in these particular areas, invest in education, invest in jobs, invest in housing, and not invest into policing and into prisons.
Do you have a lot of conversations about abolition on the inside, and if so, what are those like?
First thing I'll say, yeah, we have conversations about these things, and yeah, they're interesting, right? So every time these conversations come up, basically I'm left like struggling with two questions, because these are questions that I get often. So once people start trying to wrap their minds around the idea of like no more of these castle-like structures we call prisons, right? The first thing a person may say is, so you're telling me that you would mind like a rapist being free around your kids, right? Or a predator being free around your kids, which makes me think, right? And then another thing that I encounter is like the reimagining part of abolition makes people wonder like, all right, who is going to determine what the alternatives to prison look like, right? Because obviously we know that the state is in control of every facet of our lives, including prison. So it's like, all right, how could I reimagine a world without prison when I know that the state is only going to, if they do dismantle the prison system, what would it look like? It only is going to look like an imitation of what already existed with a minor tweaks and adjustments along the way.
So yeah, those sound like a lot of the questions that I hear out here. And how do you respond to them?
One of the interesting responses for me was trying to explain that, all right, we understand the current system that we have, right? And we understand that current system not to be working. And the evidence is in looking around, right? When we look around, we see a mess hole full of black and brown faces, right? When a bunch of security guards that's white, right? But we look in courtroom bullpens and we see the same thing, right? So obviously something more is going on here. And what is going on is not working the way that is, not the way that it's designed to work, because it's working the way that it was designed to work, but it's not working in an equitable way. Okay, so one of the answers that I give is find other ways to deal with people other than, one, locking them up and throwing away the key, right? Because when we say, I don't want this particular type of person around my kids, we're saying that I have no other way of dealing with this particular type of person other than putting them in the jail cell, right? Or the only thing that bothers me about this particular person is the offense that they've committed, not looking at all of the other things that could have led to that person committing a particular offense, right? And thinking long and hard enough to prevent that from happening again, other than four walls.
Do you have access to abolition-related reading materials inside?
sort of a yes and no answer because, yes, obviously I've had subscriptions to abolitionist newsletters, a few abolitionist books, but in whole, no, because a lot of times, like, a lot of the things that we get are censored, right? Because everything has to be reviewed and censored, and then someone up front determines if we can have it or not.
In terms of the materials that you are able to get, are you able to share them with other people inside?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely able to share them with other people.
What are some ways that individuals can support abolition in their everyday lives?
I think it's a whole list of things, but I'll name a few. One, I think something that helped me get a better understanding of abolition was to, like, read more, right? Because I can't really stand behind or support something I really don't have a firm understanding of. So I would encourage people to read more about abolition. And then another thing that I think is important that kind of ties back into what abolition conversations are like on the inside for us is creating support groups, right? Because a lot of times people think about abolition in terms of an issue that only intellectuals grapple with, right? So in the study and struggle group that I participated in, it was a collective effort of scholars, intellectuals, formerly incarcerated individuals, and having that mixed bag of people to, like, share ideas with and get ideas from kind of, like, made abolition seem more attainable and realistic for me. So definitely creating study groups from inside to outside is definitely an effective way for that people can support abolition in their everyday lives.
So I've been talking to you about abolition for quite a long time now, and it seems like it's really come into the mainstream a lot more in the past year, and that's really exciting to me. I'm wondering what your perception of that has been like. Have you felt the same thing?
I definitely felt the same thing. I mean, I can see it from, like, the couple of readings that I got my hands on, ranging from, like, the new Jim Crow to Until We Reckon to We Do This Till We Free Us, and we, like, seeing the evolution of what abolition means, and it's going from, like, this abstract idea to, like, more real and attainable ideas. So yeah, I definitely see evolution. It's exciting.
What are some of the things that you think could have been different in your life that would have kept you from being incarcerated?
It's this cliche saying, right, that we hear a lot, and we hear it often, right? And the saying goes, if you knew better, you do better, right? I think that's a true saying because I understand the power of education and how education can transform the way a person not only thinks, but the way a person behaves, right? So I say that to say that if there was more resources being placed into schools, and then the outcome of a lot of people that I know and myself personally would have been different.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say to people listening?
Keep doing the work that we're doing and try as hard as possible to reach within the walls, right? Because a lot of times people within the walls feel like they are forgotten about or they don't have a voice to lend to the conversation. And a lot of times this is where we go wrong at. We tend to, like, forget people and not add them to the conversation because they can offer interesting perspectives to kind of, like, help this ball get rolling a little bit faster. And when we do take this approach, it's like we move from just thinking about incarcerated individuals as, all right, those people over there, to actually seeing them as a part of this collective community that we're trying to gather. Yep. So that's about it.